Today's episode of SBJ I Factor is sponsored by Pepsi. Joining us today on SBJ I Factor is Kathy Carter, Chief Revenue Officer of LA28 and CEO of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee Properties. Well, it's great to have Kathy Carter join us on the I Factor. Kathy is now Chief Revenue Officer of the LA28 Summer Games and CEO of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Properties, which is the joint venture which is created by LA28 and the USOPC to control all domestic Olympic rights from 2021 to 2028. Kathy, we were so glad you're joining us today on the I Factor.
Thanks for having me.
You know, you're on because you were 40 under 40 in successive years. In 2006, 2007, you were at Soccer United Marketing, which of course handled all the commercial assets and inventory of really MLS, US Soccer Federation, and so many other entities. You were at some for 15 years, and now you're in your new role. We're going to take a little look back at your journey, your professional and personal advice, and other storytelling. And I want to start, Kathy, with the beginning, about your youth and the role that sports played as you grew up.
Yeah, well, it all started for me in soccer, actually, and I played other sports, but soccer became my game of choice, really starting at 7 years old. And I played all the way through college and played for many, many years afterwards. And so, but most importantly, what that did, and I've been in contact during these COVID periods with the girls I grew up playing with, the girls that I played with in college, and to suggest that it created a tribe of women for me and teammates who were always there and had your back at every moment is an understatement. It really defined who I became and became, I think, some of the most important lessons that I learned that I've been able to translate into business.
And let's talk about some of those lessons. And you played at William & Mary.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
So you played. And did you know, even at school at William & Mary, did you see yourself having a career in the sports business?
No, I mean, I think at that time of the business of sport and where it actually existed, nobody really knew that you could actually have a meaningful career in sports. And, you know, I was fortunate enough to have some interaction with Mark McCormick, who was also an alum of William & Mary, and he used to come back and speak to the student athletes. And we all walked out of those meetings and said, gosh, it would be great to work in sports. But in the late 80s and early 90s, it just wasn't something that you could really see the path that you could, really think 30 years from now, I could still be working in sports. And so it was really more lucky than it was something that I actually set out to accomplish, that I ended up on the journey that I've been on for all these years.
So William & Mary, I think your degree was in political science. What was the step? What was the risk that you take?
Yep. So I liberal arts undergraduate degree. I learned, as I like to tell people, I learned how to read, write, and think. And actually, I was playing soccer at an indoor facility after college. I was working at Booz Allen and Hamilton in consulting. And we were playing against a team made up of the World Cup organizing committee staff. And this was in 1993. And it turns out a woman that we were playing against, I had grown up playing soccer with. And she said, hey, we have an opening for an administrative assistant. And I was working as a consultant, thinking I was going to go back to law school. And so I applied because I figured, how cool would it be to work for the 1994 World Cup? And I got that job because I could type. And one thing led to another, and it really launched my career, interestingly enough, into sports.
Because that was when, of course, I was in Washington, D.C., right in 1994. They had all those different venues where the matches would be played. And you used that to basically catapult yourself into the world of business of soccer, correct?
That's absolutely correct. So, in essence, I started working for a gentleman by the name of Randy Bernstein and certainly Alan Rothenberg. And during the course of my journey, I ended up learning I love to sell, and I started selling even while I was answering phones for Randy. And one thing led to another, and I was promoted and moved into many different areas. But as a part and a condition of us hosting the World Cup in 1994 is that we would actually start a men's professional league in the United States. And while I was actually doing the work that I was doing, I was fortunate enough to work with Randy and Alan and many others, Mark Abbott, Ivan Gazidis, and others, on the original business plan for Major League Soccer. And so after the World Cup ended, we were all gainfully unemployed because the event ends. And in 1994, after that, in September, I actually joined forces with the original founders of Major League Soccer. And we started the journey to try to launch MLS, which that was 25 years ago. And obviously it took a couple years to get it off the ground, but that sort of became my pathway.
And so on that pathway, Kathy, you obviously earned a lot of people's respect, and you must have either worked really hard, been a quick learner. Like, what were the attributes that you were, when you look back, are proud of yourself that, hey, I was able to do this? Because the people you mentioned, all very singular focused, all accomplished executives, and you obviously impressed them because you stuck around and worked with them for a number of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I look back, we were all young enough that we were somewhat naive. Again, Alan, I think, had a lot more vision at the beginning for the balance of the group, but so we're accomplished it perhaps at this point, 25, 30 years later. At that time, we were young, naive, and just confident enough that we would have the potential to actually make this happen. And so I think it was that actual tenacity that I and everyone else had. And ultimately not willing to take no for an answer. I mean, we just kept plowing through. And I think if you think back to those early days of 1994, 1995, and ultimately when we launched the league in 1996, for many years thereafter, no one thought we still had it. We would make a go of it. And so I think it was, and for me personally, I was a young, still upstart in this business, and there was nothing I wasn't willing to take on. And I was doing all the work. I wasn't leading meetings or being out front at that point, but I never turned down, whether it was in my job description or in my wheelhouse, so to speak. But there wasn't anything I wasn't willing to roll up my sleeves and actually dive in and try to help progress the cause. And I think that became some of the secret sauce that has taken me through all these years, which is I've never shied away from doing the work.
That was one of your, I would say, biggest business advice tags in one of your 40 under 40. Don't ask somebody to do something you're not yourself willing to do.
Yeah, and to this day, I mean, I'm not. I'm more than willing to jump into the trenches and to do the work and to be a part of the solution, because ultimately, and ultimately, I love to surround myself with people who don't just have opinions, but actually have the capacity to prove out their points. And I think that is something we're building now with both the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic properties, but also with LA28, is that we have an aspiration to really do things differently, to think differently about hosting an event of the size and scale of the Olympics and the Paralympics, and ultimately to leave the entirety of the movement better than we found it. But that takes hard work and elbow grease. And sometimes I think the folks that we've brought in and that I'm working with, they say, you remember when you told me that we were going to push hard? I didn't realize what that actually meant. It's a fun journey, but it's definitely, we're working really hard.
So you got to have a capacity to handle a lot of work. Did you know, just quickly, in your early days, even in college, that you were going to be so good at selling?
No, I mean, in fact, back then, I think, the idea of selling was kind of it was a bit of a dirty word. Like, who wanted to sell? And I think I realized, and I think I did know back then, I had a capacity to convince people. And I think there's really two types of people in business. And so I don't call it selling. I say there are people who do business and there are people who make business. And I think I have always enjoyed making business, and of course you have to do the business too. But really, like, it's awesome to go out and think about how we progress things. I am not interested in just pushing a paper from one side of the desk to the other. That bores the heck out of me. And I have been really fortunate in the trajectory that I've had from a professional standpoint to actually really be able to do some things where we're constantly innovating and building and evolving, and even with things that have been around for so long. So that gets me up every morning.
You've been a leader for so long. You were at some, like I said, for the 15 years, you're now overseeing, we talked about your Olympic role. What's your management style, your leadership style, and how has it changed?
Well, I think early on, I didn't have any concept of what leadership was. I think you just sort of dove in. But you've already hit on a couple things. I think whether I'm never going to ask somebody to do something that I'm unprepared to do myself. Um, so they know that that's just a part of how we'll work together. But number two, I'd say, and I've had to learn how to temper this a little bit, which is the fine razor's edge between patience and impatience, um, because I think that there are times that things take time, and how long should they take is something you've got to be able to really understand how to allow air to be in the room, so that good thinking can happen, but also never be patient enough that you're not pushing for things to continue to move forward, and never, quite frankly, be somewhat satisfied. Always be reaching for just what's a little bit ahead of us. And I think that it's difficult to find that edge.
Do you think you're more patient now?
Well, of course, I would say yes, but I'm not
Right,
sure that everybody who works with me
right,
would echo that
Right,
comment.
right,
But
right.
I think I appreciate it more now. Let's say that.
Yeah.
So I think I have a better understanding and have the ability to take my foot off the gas a little bit more. I'm not sure everybody feels it that way, but I certainly do, because I'd be willing to push hard all the time. And I recognize there are times where you got to give a little air.
You know, you've always struck me as someone who's always very curious, and I've always thought curiosity is key to someone's success, to learn and want to learn more about different things. Is that a quality that you look for in others?
Without question. I mean, it's actually the number one quality. If someone is satisfied, I just think there's so much for us to learn, that to read, to be inquisitive about, and it makes people really good at what they do. So to me, it's probably the number one quality when you're hiring people or bringing people aboard, is just not willing to accept things because that's the way they are. It doesn't mean you have to change just for change's sake, but actually dig in a little bit and have the curiosity to say, is there a better way?
Anything else you look particularly for in applicants that you're looking to hire? What else are the attributes you like to see?
I will say for a long time, and it's still today, I would rate an athlete above a non-athlete. And again, that doesn't mean that non-athletes don't have qualities that they bring to the table, without question. But there is something that you learn in the heat of battle as an athlete that actually becomes really relevant in business. And I think that that's something that is hard to teach people. So I think athletes have something that is innate, that was born through hours of practice or even failures on the field or in the pool or on the track, that become really telltale signs for how they'll handle things in business.
And on the flip side of that, Kathy, anything that you have a very low tolerance for in job applicants?
Yeah, funny enough, as somebody who spends my time on the front lines, a lot of times, people who can't back it up,
Huh.
people who are full of BS.
Huh.
It
Can you spot that? Can you target that?
You can, it. There are a lot of people who perhaps have misplaced confidence. And listen, I've got a lot of confidence, but it's when you can't actually back it up that you become pretty thin in terms of what your potential is. And I think you get found out pretty quick.
Almost like the imposter syndrome. And you and I have known each other for so long. We've spent a lot of time talking about increasing the diversity among the ranks and the leadership of sports business. I guess my question's twofold. How difficult was it for you to be a lot of times the only woman in the room? And what progress do you think we've made in, say, the 20 years that you and I have known each other?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You get that question a lot, and one of the things I always say is I don't know what the journey would be to be in anybody else's shoes. And so I do know there have been times that it has been challenging, or I've had to prove myself, earn respect. In some cases, I could see it was given if somebody looked different. And I recognized as I got older that was actually a privilege as opposed to it being a negative, because people paid a lot more attention, or it caused me to actually have greater credibility because I had done a lot more of the work. And so it was hard, and I think I had to work harder. I think I had to lean in a lot more. I had to accept things that perhaps were not the same for others, but I wouldn't change my journey for anything. And most importantly, I think I and so many of the peers that I have and women and others in the industry, we've pushed it forward. I think we have definitely had an impact. I think the women that are coming through the system now are incredible. I think we've learned how to network. We've learned how to help each other. And I think the future is bright for us in the sports industry. I think we got to stay focused on it. I think we've got to look more at ethnic diversity, obviously now, which I don't think we're as good at. But I do believe, and I'm strong focus on having different points of view at the table. It just makes it better.
I know you often get reached out to by young people who are looking to get a start in the sports business, particularly young women. What do you tell them in terms of their path and the suggestions and advice you give them?
Well, a lot of what I've already said is that don't be afraid of doing the work. And the reality is also don't be afraid to use whatever connections you actually have to open the door.
Totally agree.
Because I think, we sometimes forget it's okay to push hard and to open the door. Because, and I tell people all the time, I'm happy to open a door. What you do once that door is open is up to you. And then don't be afraid to take advantage of who you may know, which I think for a lot of women sometimes is hard. You're like, oh, I have to, let my, do it on my own. Well, no, that's not the way it works. Kick the door open, then it's up to you. So I think networking and understanding all of that was something that was learned behavior in a lot of respects for us coming up through the ranks. And I'm hopeful we're teaching the next generation how to do that more seamlessly.
Great point. Once they get in that job, it's up to them. And if they do great work, people will notice. And then it's a lot easier to have that career trajectory. A couple of things as we start to wrap it up here. You've been involved in a lot of negotiations. I'm sure some were very difficult negotiations. How do you handle when negotiations are going poorly or going south?
Well, I'll start with, I genuinely have a philosophy around negotiation that it's not an I win, you lose type of scenario, and that a win-win is actually always better. And I think I'm known as a very tough but fair negotiator. And so when they're going south, sometimes you can't do much more than just stick in and continue to remember that it's a moment in time, and recognize that the heat of the battle should not reflect on the people and the individuals. And so finding however you can to take the steam or the heat out of the room and to show some of your human side. Sometimes it can take some of that animosity down a level, but most importantly for me is to look at it as a win-win.
Your best failure, or I guess I'll put it this way, a failure that you felt you learned the most from?
That's easy. I mean, for those that don't know, part of the reason I left Soccer United Marketing and MLS in the world of soccer is I actually took a leave of absence to run for an elected position, which was as the president of U.S. Soccer. I essentially went out on a quasi-political campaign. I lost that election, but it caused me to open my eyes to opportunities, but more importantly to what I wanted to do next. And while I wasn't successful in what I had really hoped was to lead U.S. soccer, it led me to a new journey, which I actually think has such an amazing potential for us to have an impact on Los Angeles, on our country, and ultimately on the world, because I truly believe that the Olympic and Paralympic movement has qualities about what we're dealing with in today's day and age around equality and opportunity for everyone, that I actually think I can have a bigger impact doing what I'm doing now, which is pretty cool.
That is interesting. I want to go back because you're very humble about, you ran for a very high profile office. And I don't think that people who put themselves out there get enough credit, because it can be a very bruising and personal exercise. And there's criticisms and there's support and there's people who you think are supporting you who end up don't supporting you. What did you learn during that run for U.S. Soccer president?
Thanks. And it was a big decision. I think I was naive a little bit. And so I'm not sure I understood when I went into it, the breadth and of the impact people would have with what we've seen over the last really 4 years as well about social media and the impact of people being able to use that to good and to bad. And I realized that when you go and are in politics in that particular situation, you are the product, and that becomes very, very personal. But what I realized is, and what I feel very good about putting my head on the pillow at night around that experience was and I pulled a number of great people to work with me on that. We did things based on my moral compass. We didn't go low. We didn't start to hammer people in a way that I was actually being hammered, because ultimately if you actually have an aspiration to do something good in that space, which was to lead the sport, I just didn't think I could do that if I came from a negative position. And so I just kept, and I realized that I could have done a lot of things differently, but they wouldn't have been reflective of who I am as a leader, who I am as a person. And I feel very proud of the way we ran, and ultimately what we did, and how we would have led, and how I would have led, because ultimately I never once said I'm going to do something that's outside of what my moral compass and the boundaries I'm willing to have. Never went outside of that.
Well, you stay true to yourself, and like you said, that makes you sleep easy at night, and you should feel good about that. I do want to end, because I found this very, very prophetic. In 2006, in your write-up for 40 Under 40, the first year you were honored, asked where soccer will be in 20 years, you didn't hesitate. We will have won the World Cup, and our men will stand on the same stage as our women. The league will be extraordinarily healthy, and we will be playing in at least 16 markets. So not bad.
I undershot it.
You did undershoot the number of markets, but you said we'll have the World Cup in 20 years. And then that was in 2006. In 2026, of course, we will be hosting the World Cup. So yeah. Well done. Well done.
Thanks.
So keep leading. And any last words you want to share about your current position now and what's next for Kathy Carter?
Yeah, I'd say keep an eye on what we're doing with LA28. You know, we have a shot in, as we like to say, to do something incredibly different, and to lead with diversity and optimism, which I think is reflective of Los Angeles. The city of angels has so much hope and storytelling, and it's a collection of the parts as opposed to being just one thing. And I think our message of co-creation and how we want to go about the games in Los Angeles in 2028 are going to be pretty special.
Well, a longtime leader in sports business, Kathy Carter will continue to lead in the sports industry, incredibly well regarded and well respected. We wish you all the best. Keep leading, and thank you for joining us today on the I Factor. Be well, Kathy.
Thanks, Abe. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining SBJ I Factor today. Remember to subscribe to SBJ I Factor wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to our future episodes that will hit every 2 weeks.